I'm travel journalist Bill Cleveland, and this is the Ultimate American Music Bucket List.
I think they're just surprised by the vast amount of music that was recorded here that they know. Mm-hmm. You know, it's people say, I mean, hear it daily. This is the soundtrack of my life.
Yeah. It's a special feeling to stand in the very spot where music history was made. Fortunately, travelers have quite a few opportunities to follow in the footsteps of musical greatness. In this episode, you'll come along for the ride as I stand in some of the very places that helped make household names out of artists like Elvis Presley, Aretha Franklin, Sam and Dave, the Rolling Stones, Wilson Pickett, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Roy Orbison. Right now on the Ultimate American Music Bucket List. Our first stop is in the town of Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Fame was founded in the late 1950s by Rick Hall, Billy Sherrill, and Tom Stafford. By the early 1960s, they had built the now famous Fame recording studio and scored their first hit inside those walls with a song called Steal Away by Jimmy Hughes. But it wouldn't be their last hit song, far from it. Artists and bands were soon flocking to the small town of Muscle Shoals to record with their incredible house band, better known now as the Swampers. Aretha Franklin's first #1 hit song came from a session at Fame. Everyone from the Rolling Stones to Paul Simon has stood behind the microphone in this two-story, chocolate-colored building with the big yellow letters on the rooftop spelling out FAME, which stands for Florence, Alabama Music Enterprises. If you've never had the chance to watch the documentary Muscle Shoals, it's one of the finest American music stories to ever be told. A large focus of the documentary was on Rick Hall, the legendary record producer and owner of Fame. Hall died in 2018 at the age of 85. Leaving behind an incredible career and the reins of fame to his son, Rodney. Rodney was nice enough to meet with me on a rare cold and snowy day in Muscle Shoals. We eventually took a seat inside the studio's main control room, standing next to the hundreds of buttons and sliders, looking through the glass and into the room where some of America's greatest and most notable songs have been born. The closest music city to me would be Nashville.
Right.
So then the question becomes, why would people come here to record music and not in a place like Nashville?
Well, honestly, the answer to that is because my dad decided to stay here.
Okay.
He was the founder of Muscle Shoals Music. He opened the first studio and had the first hit record and hired the first musicians. Pretty much all the studios that are in town now, which I would say it fluctuates between, probably 7 and 12 or 13 since the documentary. There's been a lot of people moved here and want to take advantage of the newfound notoriety. But they've all, pretty much all of them have spun off of us, and if they didn't, they're just, like I say, they just moved to town to carpet bag.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So they came here for...
But basically what happened was my dad was in a band. He had bands, and they were writing songs. There were some gentlemen here doing some publishing.
Yeah.
A guy named James Joyner and a few others. And there had been a man here named Buddy Killen that was from Florence, and he moved to Nashville and got into publishing. And he had one of the largest publishing companies in the world at one point, Tree Publishing. So my dad had been writing songs, and through those, James Joyner and Buddy Killen had gotten some cuts with and had become friends with Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley in Nashville, who were the two guys that built Nashville. Yeah. Started getting songs cut. He had a song, had a hit on Brenda Lee, and had one on Roy Orbison, and then one on Tommy Rowe, and George Jones. Had a George Jones cut. And so he had started doing recording on his own, songwriting demos, and then he started wanting to record other artists. So he found this artist named Arthur Alexander, a black bellhop here in town, and he went in, and Arthur had written a song called "You Better Move On," and so he went in the studio, recorded that song, and took it to Nashville, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it because it was too black for country music. Mm-hmm. So he finally got a record, got a guy out in L.A., Randy Wood, to put "You Better Move On" out, and it was on BJ Records and became a huge hit. The Beatles covered one side, the Beatles covered "A Shot of Rhythm and Blues," which is the B side, and the Stones recorded "You Better Move On." Okay. On some of their first recordings.
Right.
So it immediately impacted the world.
Right.
So from there, more hits started happening. People started coming. The word started getting out, and it just became a thing. And the more hits they had, people wanted to get that sound. Yeah. And they were coming here, and my dad had multiple rhythm sections over the years, and because of that, over the years, we've developed a whole community of great studio musicians and songwriters and engineers. They just it completely organically built. I mean, there's never been a marketing budget anywhere in Muscle Shoals. It's always been people reading the back of album covers.
Right.
So
right.
It just kind of happened that way. As we were always a behind-the-scenes production company for major labels like Atlantic Records or Capitol mm-hmm. Records, and so people would read our name, recorded at, but it wasn't marketed under our name, so there never was really marketing. It was all word of mouth.
Wow. You mentioned a couple of songs on your website. I was scrolling through and just looking at a few of the hit songs, recognizable songs. One that came to was Mustang Sally, mm-hmm. which I love that song. Wilson Pickett, and was it Land of a Thousand Dances? Was mm-hmm. that one? Are there any other big, songs that most people would recognize and would know that were recorded here?
There's hundreds.
Yeah,
there's hundreds. Mustang Sally, Land of a Thousand Dances, Aretha Franklin's first hit, "I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You," mm-hmm. Was recorded here. "Do Right Woman," Little Richard recorded here. He did Greenwood, Mississippi. Bobby Gentry did "Fancy" here. Mac Davis did 13 albums, including "Baby Don't Get Hooked on Me" and "Texas in My Rearview Mirror." And there's been over 200 top 10 records recorded here. Wow. And so yeah, it's a who's who of artists. We had several generations of artists. So there was the R&B era, which was Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Etta James, Solomon Burke, Lou Rawls. Wilson Pickett, Arthur Alexander, Arthur Conley. I mean, it really goes on and on and on and on.
It becomes like a trivia show trying to remember them all.
I can't. So then they got into the 70s, and it was more pop. It was the Osmonds. Mm-hmm. They sold 15 million records in 1 year out of records they had done here. One Bad Apple and Yo-Yo and Down by the Lazy River.
Right.
Paul Anka, Wayne Newton was in that era. Mac Davis again. He's been here for decades.
Yeah.
Clarence Carter, Candy Staten, and then got into doing country music with Shenandoah and Larry Gatlin in Alabama, and so it's 60 years. We've been in business consecutively for 60 years. We're the only studio here that can say that.
Right.
All the rest of the studios will be be in business. Have been in business for a decade or so, and then they sell out or whatever, and then 20 years later somebody else will buy their building and they'll call it the same thing. And
right.
Like, oh yeah, there's Muscle Shoals Sound, there's Wishbone, but it's we're the only ones that's been here. We're the first, and as my dad used to say, we'll be the last.
What is sort of I've been to Motown, I've been to Sun Studio. Yeah, I know each place sort of has a process or. Like for example, I know that Motown was always open 24 hours a day so that artists could come in and record if they got a itch to record at 3 o'clock in the morning. The doors were open. What is especially early on? What was sort of the process for artists to come in and record? Were there a lot of people in here at one time? People kind of fighting to get their chance to go in and record, or a little more organized, or what?
Back in the day, back in the early days, the we were in the middle of a cotton field, literally, and there was nothing around. So there was nobody knew what was going on here. There were celebrities here, and none of the local people even knew was happening. But they would come in, they would book time, and they would come in and spend sometime 2 or 3 weeks here, and get their songs together. They'd go in the studio, and they would go in with the basic rhythm section, which is bass, drums, guitars, keyboards, and a vocalist, and they would get the basic track, and then they would bring the horns in, and the horns would be rehearsing the whole time while they were getting that, and when they'd get it, they'd all go in together, and you'd have 10 or 11, 12 people in there at the same time. And in the early days of recording, the technology was such that everyone had to get it right at the same time. There wasn't going back and fixing anything. Right. So the engineer, all the musicians, and the singer had to get their part close to right. That's why if you go back and listen to some records, there are some
not like today,
things,
where you can
out of tune or whatever.
Right, and you can record today. You can record stuff in 12 different cities and throw it all in.
Exactly.
So you had to do it all in one room.
Oh yeah, you had to do it all in one room and all at the same time.
Yeah. So
it was a different world than it is now. There'd be 12, 14 guys in the room, and they had to all get it right at the same time. So they would be in there for 8 or 10 hours sometimes working on one song, which we still spend that much time or more on songs, but it's not all together. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's you can bring people in at different times and different, even different cities, like you say.
Yeah. Are there any moments looking back that you were able to experience in here that you kind of pinch yourself now and go, man, I can't believe that I was able to kind of be around this?
We worked on a record over the last few years that I was lucky enough to put together, and it's called Muscle Shoals, Small Town, Big Sound. And it was basically what we were doing is going back in the studio with current day artists and re-recording some classic Muscle Shoals tunes. So we had Steven Tyler came in with Nuno Betancourt from Extreme, and he did Brown Sugar. We had Michael McDonald come in and do an Etta James song. We had Alison Krauss, Alan Jackson, Keb Mo, Kid Rock, Aloe Block, Cord Overstreet, I don't leave anybody out, Demi Lovato. We had just a whole slew of celebrities come in, and those were the defining moments I remember. When you've been a Doobie Brothers and a Michael McDonald fan your whole life, and he walks into the booth. I'm telling you, everybody in that room, and these were legendary musicians that have played on tons of hit records. When Michael McDonald opened his mouth, everybody in the room just kind of went, wow, that's Michael McDonald.
From Ferguson, Missouri.
My
neck of the woods.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, that's really cool. So for folks who have either, learned through a documentary, or they've studied online, or they know just their music history, they come through here, what are some things that people are kind of surprised by? Just, an average person walking through and they take a tour and
I think they're just surprised by the vast amount of music that was recorded here that they know. Mm-hmm. It's people say, I hear it daily, this is the soundtrack of my life.
Yeah.
And just the diversity of it all, not just the diversity of it in music, in that it's pop, it's country, it's soul, it's gospel, it's a little all of that, but also the diversity of the people that recorded here. Mm-hmm. And that you had black and white musicians working together in Alabama in the 60s while George Wallace was sicking dogs on people and things. That it wasn't like that everywhere in Alabama. That it was the mute, just when you walked in the studio, there was no color, there was no race, there was no gender. Mm-hmm. It was who is the best musician and who's bringing it today.
We head now to Memphis, Tennessee, one of the most important cities in the story of American music. Whether it's early rock and roll or blues, Memphis cranked out some of the most important artists to ever record. Elvis Presley and Aretha Franklin are top of mind, but musical greats like Al Green, Memphis Slim, B.B. King, and even Justin Timberlake all reigned from here. In 1950, a man named Sam Phillips began to capture some of that Memphis sound inside what was known as the Memphis Recording Service. It sat adjacent to Sun record label, where if you know just the slightest bit of music history, you'll know it's best known as the place where a young 18-year-old Elvis Presley came to record a song for his mother in 1953. It was called My Happiness and cost the future king of rock and roll just $4 to record. Standing inside the historic studio is a must-do for anyone traveling through Memphis. I was lucky enough to spend time alone in Sun Studio with a young expert at the ripe old age of 20 who works as a tour guide and is living proof that the songs made here will forever stand the test of time. All right, so we are actually in Sun Studio right now in Memphis, Tennessee. This is very exciting. I'm with Kat Jones. She's a fantastic tour guide. Is it appropriate to call you a tour guide?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. She's young. She's 20 years old. She shouldn't even know all of the stuff that she was spouting out here today. All of the great music history that has come through these doors here at Sun Studio. So, Kat, I'm just going to jump right in. Here's the thing that impressed me the most about what we just experienced. And I've taken this tour before, and you're way better than the last person that I had. It's been a few years, but you're fantastic. And so, and one thing I didn't know before that I learned today, this is so cool. You talked about Johnny Cash and how Johnny Cash wanted to play in the Grand Ole Opry. The Grand Ole Opry, I guess, in like a lot of, I guess back in the day, country music was not very favorable toward drums or the drum sounds on a record. And so you demonstrated in front of this little group here how Johnny Cash got around not having a drum set on stage because you played Walk the Line, right? Was it Walk the Line? Yeah, you played Walk the Line, and I love that song. I've heard it 1,000 times, and I always thought I was listening to drums, and I wasn't listening to drums, was I?
No, you weren't. So it does sound like a snare, but what he would actually do is take a dollar bill, a piece of paper, something like that, weave it through the strings of his guitar, detune them, so loosen them up a lot, kind of mute them with the top of his hand, and then he'd play it like normal rhythm guitar, and it sounds exactly like a drum.
I'm telling you, the crowd was just flabbergasted. Unbelievable. So that was pretty cool. That's one of the many fun things that you'll learn when you take a trip here to Memphis, Tennessee, and stop by Sun Studio. Rightfully ranked, I believe, on TripAdvisor as the number 1 attraction in the city of Memphis. So let's talk just a little bit about the building itself. You alluded to the fact that it sat dormant for, what do you say, about 25 years before they started using it again after Sam Phillips had originally rented the place?
Yeah, from 1959 to 85. There was some things in and out of here, some small shops, but nothing really lasted too long. So it sat as an empty building for the majority of that time.
And when you stand in the studio, and you'll get to go into the studio and see, it looks exactly the way that it did when Elvis and all of these great artists recorded in here. And people are still recording in here from time to time. We'll talk about that maybe in a second. But, you look straight up, and we're looking up right now, and it looks like many of the ceiling tiles are about to fall on us. Everything is original. Nothing has been changed. I think that is really cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Marion Keisker painted these ceiling tiles herself. Her and Sam assembled them all together.
Yeah. One of the cool things I think that you do on this tour, and I don't think it's a big secret, but you play some recordings that were done in the studio. And so as you're standing here as part of the tour and you hear those sounds coming over the speaker, it just gives you chills a little bit. It's pretty neat the way you guys sort of present this.
Yeah, it's kind of fantastic for the music that was created here in this room to be continued to play.
Yeah, talk about some of the people who still actually use Sun Studio. The list is pretty long. People want to come in and get, as you said when you were giving your little speech up there, there's that Sun Studio magic. So who else is recording here now from time to time?
I mean, starting in '87 to this day, we've had bands come in. U2 has been here. We've had Bonnie Raitt, we've had Beck, Ringo Starr, Lisa Marie Presley. Just last year, Chris Isaak was here doing a session with Scotty Moore from Elvis's original band. So you never know who's going to walk through these doors.
Yeah. And as far as Elvis goes, and I assume Elvis just overshadows everyone else who's recorded in here. It almost didn't happen, did it? I mean, when you start thinking about the story of them discovering Elvis, when you think about all the things that went wrong, it's amazing to think that he actually became what he became.
It really is overwhelming. It was just one day in the life of an 18-year-old kid that completely changed everything.
Well, talk a little bit about that, because for folks who may not know, he, I guess, came here wanting to just record a record at first, right? Just like other people could do, right? What would you say, like $4 you can come in and record your own song? Is that right?
Exactly. Custom session, $4, 2 songs.
And so Elvis, I guess, comes in and does that and kind of share the story as far as from there.
So when he comes in, Sam Phillips, the main engineer, is not actually here. Instead, it's his secretary, a lady named Marion Keisker. She ends up recording Elvis, and, well, she becomes his first real fan. And so from there on, she basically begged Sam until he had the kid come back.
Yeah. And then and Sam Phillips did not like Elvis. Did not like the sound.
No, at first he couldn't stand it. It was ballads, and that's not what Sam wanted to record.
Right. So in a way, would you find it appropriate to say that, this studio, I guess, kind of changed the world, didn't it, in some way?
It really did. When you think about the amount of artists that came in that before nobody knew their name, and then they completely changed the way the music is today.
Yeah. One of my favorite musicals, and I don't like a lot of musicals for people keeping score at home, but there are a few that I do enjoy, and one was $1 Million Quartet. Have you seen it? I assume you've seen it.
I have, yeah. I just got the chance not too long ago, I would say about a month, when saw it at the Apollo in Chicago.
Okay, yeah, it's fantastic. Music is great. It's a great story, and it tells the story of the night. It's in December. I can't remember. Was it Christmas Eve?
December 4th, actually.
Like I said, December 4th. and it's Johnny Cash, and it's Elvis Presley and Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis, and they're in the studio, and I'm trying to remember. It's been a couple of years since I've seen it, but they're basically recreating that night and everything that sort of led up to the evening. And you've all seen the famous picture of the four of them sitting around a piano. Elvis Presley sitting at a piano, and the other artists as well. And now you can actually, I guess, where would they go to hear that? The audio from that night was recorded and just recently released within the last 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, we actually have it here. There are several different places you can buy at your favorite music store.
My favorite music store. And where might that be?
Sun Studio.
Oh, you do sell it here.
Yeah, we actually do.
Okay, well, there you go. Don't go it on YouTube. Come here and buy it, for God's sakes. Well, let me ask you something. We had I was part of a little tour group here. There's 7 or 8 people, and I was under the impression that most of them were not from the United States. They seemed like they were international, most of them anyway. Do you find that most people that come here are from the United States, or people are coming from other parts of the world?
We have a pretty decent mix, but I'd say the majority of our customers are coming over from England, Australia. I mean, this music that was created here in this room touched all corners of the world, so everybody's got to be here and experience it and see it for themselves. And
we'll wrap up here. I'll ask you, what sort of, to this day, you work here, you're here every day, what still kind of fascinates you? What sort of things when you walk through the door and go, holy crap, I can't believe I get to see this every day, or I get to experience this every day?
Exactly what you said. I work here 5 days a week. I'm in and out of this room all day long, but sometimes you can just sit in this room and, just imagine the guys right in here. This is this tiny little room, this little, looks run down, but, man, the success that came out of this room, it really is overwhelming. That's all I can say.
No, I think overwhelming is a great word. And, ladies and gentlemen, she got a job promotion today.
Woohoo!
So congratulations to you.
Well, thank you very much.
If people would like to experience Sun Studio, a visit for themselves, where's a good website for them to check out?
Check out sunstudio.com.
Well, that is just so easy. sunstudio.com. All right, Kat, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So the last stop on this musical road trip is not too far from Sun Studio. Stax Records was also located here in Memphis, the physical studio where greats like Sam and Dave, Al Green, and Otis Redding once laid down tracks is no longer around, but a museum with many of the same artifacts used in the original building now stands in its place. The Stax Museum of American Soul Music tells a wonderful story, not just about the great songs that were recorded or produced here, but a story of musicians, black and white, working together as a team to make great sounds and ignoring the racial tension that was happening outside the studio's front doors. Inside the walls of Stax, these talented performers were a family and delivered some incredible songs that have stood the test of time. The Stax record label delivered some of the great soul songs of the generation, tunes like Hold On, I'm Coming, Mr. Big Stuff, Try a Little Tenderness, Soul Man, and I'll Take You There. The museum is fantastic and a must-do on our American music bucket list. Tim Sampson is the museum's director of communications and an avid cheerleader for the importance of Stax Records and its special place in music history.
Stax Records was the sort of mom and pop southern, started out as the mom and pop southern soul label accidentally by a man who moved over here to record country music, and he met Rufus Thomas and some other people, and before you know it, Otis Redding came here, another accident. He came here driving another band, but got a chance to audition. So it went, it started out as a very small record label, and it grew to be one of the largest, most influential labels in the world. It was Otis Redding, Isaac Hayes, Sam and Dave, Booker T and the MGs, Johnny Taylor, Rufus and Carla Thomas, the Dramatics, you name it. If it was Southern Soul, it came from this little corner here, which was an abandoned movie theater when they moved in. They moved in and did a little remodeling, as much as they could afford with their $300, and it just skyrocketed. So it's a really sacred ground, not only for Memphis, but for the world. We have people from every continent that come here every day because Stax is pretty much considered the most authentic American music, some of the most authentic American music, because it was rough and emotional and gritty and not polished, and it just has that sort of appeal to people who want to, hear something that's authentic. Yeah. And we're seeing more and more of that desire for authenticity all the time.
What I thought was cool, the founder was he worked in banking. He was a banker.
He was a banker. He was a white guy, a banker. And his sister was a bank teller. And he played the fiddle at night in some bands. He liked what had been going on, what they'd been doing over at Sun Studio with Elvis and Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis. So he knew he wasn't going to be able to make it as a musician, so he decided to become a record producer. And he got this old tape recorder and started out in a garage. And I think he was the original garage band guy. And it was just sort of this really great story of American history, of music history, the way it all just sort of came about very honestly and sincerely, and then turned into this just incredible music label.
Things were very different in Memphis, Tennessee, and across the country when this place was really hopping, or when the studio itself was hopping in its heyday. But what I thought was really neat, you were talking about, this was sort of an oasis for people. Of white, black, didn't matter. Once people walked through the door, they were here to make music, and that's really all they cared about. I think that is really, really neat.
It was really neat and very different, and I attribute that to Estelle Axton and Jim Stewart. Jim Stewart, the founder, and his sister Estelle Axton, because when they moved in to this location, this was a neighborhood that was transitioning and was pretty much African American, and had they been like so many other people at that time and had been racist, none of this would ever have happened, but they weren't. They loved music, they loved musicians, they loved kids, because a lot of the musicians that came to Stax came out of high school. They were still in high school when they came over here. They found out there was a recording studio, and the young white musicians found out about it. They had been sneaking into all the R&B joints because that's the kind of stuff they love. So once they found out about it, they all kind of ended up here, and you ended up with, here's Booker T and the MGs as the house band, 2 black guys and 2 white guys that are like 4 brothers. And it just had that, and I don't think that they really thought about it that much. I don't think they saw themselves as pioneers in the civil rights movement or anything like that. it was just not an issue to the people I've talked with, former Stax artists. They just said it, and until Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, it really wasn't an issue at all. And then things changed a little. And the way the best explanation I've heard is that they never even thought about it before, all of a sudden they thought about it, because it was like a 9/11 in Memphis when that happened. So, but they kept going. They all loved each other, and they kept going strong, and lasted another 7 years after the assassination, and after losing all their catalog to Atlantic Records and losing Otis Redding in 1967. He was only 26 years old, died in a plane crash. So it's a story of a lot of ups and downs and highs and lows, and it's a great story.
And talk a little bit about the neighborhood itself. You were showing us a picture where Aretha Franklin lived down the street.
Yeah, this is called Soulsville, USA. It's still called Soulsville, USA. It's called Soulsville mainly now. But lots of musicians came from this neighborhood. Like I said, Aretha Franklin was born right down the street. Memphis Slim lived next door. Memphis Minnie, Booker T. Jones, and Booker T. and the MGs. Al Green recorded all of his music right around the corner at High Records. David Porter, who co-wrote with Isaac Hayes over 200 Stax songs, grew up about a block away next door to Maurice White, who went on and found Earth, Wind, and Fire. So there was just... And the way they describe it to me is that you would walk through the neighborhood and there would be people out just like singing on the corner and harmonizing and dying to get inside Stax Records. And they had put a record store where the movie theater's concessions stand had been. So it was like this big hub of activity with all these people coming in to buy records. But Estelle Axton, who ran it to make extra money, figured out, okay, this is how I'm going to know what's hot and what's selling. So she used it as a marketing tool, and she would just put records on and watch people's reactions. And if they really got into it, she would take it back to the writers in the studio and to Jim and say, hey, this is hot. People are out here dancing in the record store. Let's do something like this. Right. And she kept a filing system of who bought what and when, and just a really interesting operation.
But one of the things that you guys hit on really right when you walk into the Stax Museum is the fact that so many of these artists, maybe all of these artists, got their start and inspiration in church, singing in church choirs or singing in front of a congregation, whatever. And you have an actual kind of a church building, I guess, in here, don't you?
It's an actual church. It's not a replica. It's an old country chapel with paint peeling and hand-carved pews. It was built in 1906 down in Duncan, Mississippi, right outside Clarksdale, Mississippi. And when the congregation moved to a newer building in the 50s or 60s, they sealed it with siding. I don't know why, but they did, and it was like a time capsule. So our original CEO, who was also the head of publicity for Stax Records, it was her grandparents' church, and she got it donated. So we went down to Mississippi and took it apart and brought it back and put it back together inside the museum. And I've had people walk in and the hair on their arms stand up. I've had people walk in and start crying. It's just got this feel to it because it is, how much went on in this building, both worship-wise and music-wise. And it was one of the few places where African Americans could be together and share and, and make music and do what they wanted to do together.
Right. You mentioned Isaac Hayes a little while ago. You referenced him. He's represented here in the museum in a handful of ways, but one of those, the Academy Award, right, is on display for the theme from Shaft, correct? Mm-hmm. But what is the biggie? Tell the folks what the big thing that they'll see that was once belonged to Isaac Hayes.
Well, at the peak of Isaac Hayes' success, he was renegotiating his contract with Stax Records, and Al Bell, who owned Stax at the time, had really been grooming Isaac Hayes to be a major solo artist, and the Black Moses image and all that. So Al Bell bought him had a custom made, a 1972 Cadillac Eldorado that's peacock blue with gold trim and white fur carpet and a refrigerator and a television, and it's about as long as 5 or 6 Mini Coopers. And it spins in a circle, and it's just this beautiful, gorgeous, blue, gold-trimmed, fur-lined Cadillac that you'll never see anything like unless you come to the Stax Museum.
And what do you hear, Tim, if you get too close to the car?
don't touch my ride.
That's what you hear. Don't touch his car. Well, what a fantastic place, the Stax Museum of American Soul Music here in Memphis, Tennessee. If you are a music lover, if you love history, really something for everybody. Really cool place. And Tim, thank you again very much for giving us a tour.
Sure. Thank you very much.
My thanks to all of my guests, Rodney, Nina, and Tim. It's always great to visit Fame, Sun Studio, and Stax. And those are just some of the recording studios that you can still tour and have earned a spot in the American Music Bucket List. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out AmericanMusicBucketList.com. That's where you can also order a copy of the book, The Ultimate American Music Bucket List, a guide for music lovers and road trippers. Please tell your friends and family about this podcast to help keep these great musical stories alive, and encourage them to download the entire podcast through their favorite app, including the iTunes Store and Spotify's Anchor platform. Thanks for listening. I'm Bill Cleveland. You can check out my travels across America through my website, BillOnTheRoad.com.